Welcome back and Happy New Year everyone for the 13th episode of my campaign review and tier list series. We're going to the deep south of the Caucasus for this one. But for those who are new or need a recap, this is the series where I review each of AoE2 DE's official campaigns, breaking each down scenario by scenario, evaluating its strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately placing them on the tier list. Each episode will now cover only a single campaign, going in chronological order within the Mountain Royals DLC. As always, I would like to take a quick moment to say that these videos still take plenty of time to make, so if you are hyped for this episode, please be sure to leave a like, comment on what you think of these campaigns, and of course subscribe to the channel for tons more AoE2 content. Sellout done, it's campaigning time. The second of the Mountain Royals campaigns is Tamar. Lasting from 1185 to 1211, our Georgian's campaign begins around only 16 years after the end of Thoros, and is contemporary with the later events of Saladin and Barbarossa, as well as the entirety of Prithviraj and the early parts of Genghis Khan. Naturally, Tamar is the showcase of the second of the Mountain Royal civilizations, the Georgians, although both Armenians and Persians do show up. Furthermore, after Joan of Arc, Yodit, and Jadwiga, Tamar is AoE2 DE's fourth female campaign protagonist. In short, this campaign covers the life of Queen Tamar of Georgia, a small kingdom in the Caucasus Mountains that is trying to cling to independence from the powerful Slavic, Turkic, and Persian empires surrounding it. Tamar has to balance her ambitions and the stability of her kingdom with the harsh realities of a hostile geopolitical climate. Concerning its difficulty, Tamar is rated as being 3 swords or hard by the developers. This is interesting because although Tamar is probably a bit easier than the 1-sword Thoros in terms of pure challenge, the scenarios are much more complex, so that, combined with a respectable difficulty, I think safely places it on the lower end of the 3-sword campaigns. With all of our exposition complete, let's trek into the mountains to see what's going on in the Tamar campaign. Well, as it turns out, things are pretty darn bleak in the first scenario, Takeover. Tamar is forced to flee her homeland due to the conniving Aznari nobleman and her own power-hungry husband Yuri. Tamar seeks refuge with her friends, the Zakarian brothers, in Armenia. After a rather comical intro, you are given a feudal age base and a daunting task: to raise an army powerful enough to challenge Yuri and seize his monument back in Georgia. Still, there is quite a ways to go before you get there. Your first problem is that the countryside is overrun with bandits, so you need to take them out and restore the town's fortified churches, which will grant you some buildings and villagers. In addition, Yuri has hired human mercenaries who hold a camp to the north to attack you, and the Aznari nobles control 3 towns in the center of the map that oppose you. On top of all of that, the Seljuk Sultan sends constant raids into Armenia and Georgia from a sprawling camp to the south. However, do not fear, the Cuman mercenaries can be stopped by killing or converting their chief. Converting will give you the additional benefit of the Cumans fighting your enemies. The Georgian towns will surrender to you once the Aznari noble in it is killed, and the Seljuk base does not include any walls or castles. Once all of this is cleared and out of the way, your path is open to a direct conflict with Yuri at the west of the map, who boasts a relatively strong city in Tbilisi, with the monument protected by walls and towers. Alright, so you've really got your work cut out for you in Takeover. As you might be able to guess, I am a big fan of this level. Yes, it does the necessary intro scenario stuff of showing off the Georgian economy bonus with the fortified church repairs, and yes, regenerating cavalry is quite powerful against all of your opponents. All of that is good and necessary, but in my opinion, Takeover really takes it a step further in its progression. Within the scenario itself, you go from humble beginnings and struggling to fight off feudal age bandits, to being slightly more powerful in the castle age, fighting mercenaries and raiders, until you finally take the Georgian towns and suddenly have access to the units and techs needed to beat down Yuri, literally seizing the throne, aka the monument. It's really cool to see your strength grow throughout the scenario like that, and sets a high bar for the rest of the campaign. With Tamar tenuously clinging to power, we must command our armies to conquer those who oppose her rule in the second scenario, Yuri's Revenge. The mission begins with you controlling Tbilisi, the Georgian capital, but find yourself under heavy siege from none other than your jealous ex-husband Yuri. The basic objective here is to protect the monument in Tbilisi for 50 in-game minutes. However, in addition to Yuri, the Byzantines and Georgian rebels also threaten you from large fortified camps to the west and south of the map, and your only defenders are the fairly weak Zakarian brothers. Especially as Yuri possesses some Imperial Age upgrades and you are stuck in the Castle Age, this may seem like a fairly daunting defense, but there are some actions you can take to swing the tide in your favor. Both the Byzantines and the Georgian rebels hold a castle in their bases, which, if destroyed, will cause that faction to resign and turn all of their infrastructure over to Ivana and Zakare. This just leaves Yuri himself, who commands his armies from a large camp to the far north of the map. You have access to at least Castle Age siege, and and if you can defeat him, the scenario can end even before the timer elapses. Okay, so Yuri's Revenge is a scenario whose idea I like more than its execution. It reminds me a lot of Bari 4, where you have to defend the castle from the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy, but our Georgian scenario is simply far too easy. This level is meant to show off the Georgian defenses with fortified churches, Sivan towers garrisoned with crossbowmen, monks, etc. I mean, all the pieces are there, the map setup is nice, and the concept of you having to defend your allies to hold the line is all good. It's just they don't throw all that much at you. Going after the Byzantines and Georgian rebels is fine, although they have their castles right at the front of their bases, which makes them pretty easy to snipe. To me, it feels like Yuri's Revenge was a scenario that may have been more difficult at some point, but as it stands right now, the mission just doesn't quite feel like it should. Firmly in control of Georgia, Tamar can begin to look outward in the third scenario, the Protectorate. Suffering from devastating raids of the Turkomans, the region of Shirvan to the east of Georgia asked for help from its would-be protector Tamar, which sets the stage for this mission. Tamar begins with a small but well-equipped camp to the north of the map, right on the Caspian Sea. The big catch to this scenario is that you cannot train any villagers, and are stuck with the 15 you begin with. The fairly low 100 population limit does not help the situation either. However, you can still grow your economy with fishing ships, trade carts, relics, and converting enemy villagers. That said, your main source of income is going to come in the form of tributes from Shirvan, a medium-sized city to the far east that you must protect, as well as looting enemy buildings. Dominating the middle of the map is Shamkor, a former Shirvanese city that is now largely in ruins and being held by the Turkomans. Liberating its 3 areas by capturing its flags will return the sections of the city back to Shirvan. On top of all of that, you have your main adversaries in the scenario, the Turkomans, and your ex that just won't give up, Yuri. The Turkomans are the more immediate threat, as their sprawling camp to the south will attack Shirvan and you by both land and sea, and although the Shirvanese are fairly well defended, they will likely need your help at least a little bit. Yuri, meanwhile, has his own camp to the far west and is initially neutral to you. Once you start taking Shamkor, however, he will join the fight on the side of the Turkomans. Alrighty, so there is plenty going on in the Protectorate. This is just a solid scenario all around, as you need to be at least a little bit more creative in figuring out how to approach your economy. Raids are important early on, and the regenerating HP of Georgian cavalry is useful here. You may even need to utilize the Georgian defenses to protect both you and Shirvan. The limited economy means you need to take efficient fights, as both Yuri and the Turkomans will attack with full Imperial Age armies. As Nari Cavalry, the Georgian unique tech, is quite helpful as well, allowing you to get over 100 units by reducing the population space of cavalry by 15%. Overall, the Protectorate provides some fun and unique gameplay while showing off more strengths of the Georgian civilization, which are the main qualifications of what I would consider to be a successful scenario. Seeking to further expand her influence, Tamar looks west to Armenia and Anatolia in the 4th scenario, Tamar the Builder. On this large map full of twisting rivers, impassable mountains, and even the Black Sea, Tamar must aid the Zakarian brothers in their efforts to reclaim Armenia from the Shadadids. You begin with a small town to the far east of the map and are given 2 daunting tasks: liberate the various Armenian cities for your allies, keeping them alive in the process, and then eventually take on the immensely powerful Rum Sultanate to the west. Still, you have to start small. The Zakarian brothers begin very weak and are under threat from the Shadadids, Seljuks, and even the Saracens from the south. Complicating matters even further, every building that you or your allies lose gives resources to your enemies, meaning you need to maintain a strong defense. Of course, as you conquer more of Armenia for your allies, they become stronger, but it also opens up additional areas to defend. On top of all of this, your nephew Alexios has recently been driven from Constantinople by the Crusaders and begs your assistance in recapturing the city of Trebizond to the northwest of the map. The city is well defended, but getting to the town center will eliminate the enemy forces and yield you another ally. On top of that, Alexios will attempt to build a wonder, which, if completed, will allow your ally to send plenty of post-imp Byzantine units at the Seljuks. Wow, there is a lot going on here in Tamar the Builder. Again, I think it's a really cool concept. Having to snipe the Shadadid town centers encourages you to use the mobility, resiliency, and strength of the Georgian cavalry to raid, but then having to defend the various towns across Armenia forces you to utilize the mighty Georgian defenses. The Byzantine side quest is absolutely worth it and another way to make use of the Georgian cavalry, so it seemed like an awesome scenario, right? Well, it's almost great. Unfortunately, like the second level, Tamar the Builder heavily suffers from being too easy. The need to keep your buildings alive while also expanding the fronts you need to defend is a really cool concept, and the map design is on point. It's just not all that difficult to lose next to no buildings to the increasingly feeble raids from the Turks and Saracens. By the time you reach the post-Imperial Age, the Turks won't have much left to defend, and not even possess their own post-imp army. The Saracens are a force that is too strong to take out, but they just don't send that many units at you. This feels like another mission that is just a few tweaks away from being one of the most memorable out there. Our Georgian finale arrives in the epically titled scenario, The Queen in the Panther's Skin. Now sick and aging, Queen Tamar looks to lead one one last hurrah against the formidable Khwarazm Shah of Persia. This scenario is divided into two parts, and if you are familiar with Jadwiga 6, this level is somewhat similar. You begin in a small camp to the center of the map and can initially only access the western half. You are given 25 in-game minutes to complete as many side objectives as possible. The most important of these is to liberate the Persian cities, as doing so will give you much needed resources as well as an increase in pop limit. You only start with 60 max population and can work your way up to 140, which does carry over into the second half of the level, so multitasking and efficient route running are essential here. Trade workshops can be plundered for more resources, as can the Silk Road outpost to the west. That leaves the two secondary factions, the Turkomans who hold a small city to the north, as well as the Ghurids who maintain a fortress to the south. Destroying the Turkomans will give you tons of resources, as well as I believe 5 or so relics in the second half of the mission, and destroying the Ghurid fortress will reduce the amount of units they send at you later on. So when you finish all of these objectives, or when 25 minutes have passed, you lose control of everything in the western half of the map, and after a small cutscene, you begin the second part of the scenario to the east. After choosing whether you would rather have extra resources or the support of your Armenian allies, you are given control of a small camp and are almost immediately beset by an enormous Persian and Ghurid army. At this point, your task is simply to destroy the 5 enemy castles in their combined fortress to the northeast, but your enemies have quite a lot of units, so this is easier said than done. So, what to make of our multi-part Georgian finale? It's actually quite a good level. Although it bears some similarities with Jadwiga 6, they play out quite differently. Here you have limited resources in the first section, and instead of the completed objectives giving you extra troops in the final battle, you are instead given primarily economic advantages for the later build and destroy section. My only complaint here is that even if you struggle in choosing an efficient route in your first attempt, once you figure out where everything is, the execution of completing all of the objectives is very easy to do in the allotted time, unlike Jadwiga 6. Beyond that, the second part of the level is a fitting epic battle to end the campaign, and the limited population forces you to once again make use of the efficient Georgian army. Now, with Tamar wrapped up like 2023, it's time to broaden our considerations for the campaign as a whole. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here. Starting as always with the strengths, I feel like first and foremost we need to talk about the level design. Each and every scenario in this campaign feels interesting and unique, with no scenario that simply plays out as, okay, boom up to your pop limit and patrol across the map. Now, this is not necessarily concerning the various army compositions, which I'll get to in a little bit, but more has to do with your approach to each mission. As I mentioned earlier, the first level really has you build up your strength over time, from using knights to deal with bandits to using Monaspa in siege to supplant Yuri. The second scenario forces a more defensive approach, encouraging the use of garrison Savan towers and Monaspa raids to battle a technologically superior enemy. The third mission doubles down on the raiding concept to the point of preventing the player from controlling a traditional economy, but still emphasizes the population and cost efficiency of your army. Defending your allies and pushing out on the map is necessary in the fourth mission, and even in the final scenario, you only get up to a 140 population limit and are given little time to build up for the final fight. There is no sitting back in this campaign, and encouraging players to be active on the map, whether that be through the core gameplay or via side quests, is a good thing in my books. Now, I haven't had the chance to talk about the story too much since the scenarios are all so complex, but this is another strong point in the campaign. Tamar herself is front and center in every scenario, and the narrator being Tamar's daughter, recounting the tale of the Georgian glory days to the conquering Ogadai Khan, is a nice tie-in to events in other campaigns. Both Tamar and Georgia itself go through ups and downs, and it's through sheer willpower that our queen is able to accomplish these great feats. Ultimately, Georgia does fall back into insignificance, but your actions enshrine Tamar's era as an important part of Georgian history, which I think is a pretty compelling theme in this campaign. Still, as awesome as the Tamar campaign is, there are unfortunately some issues I need to talk about. There are only really two problems I have here, and although neither breaks the fun of the campaign, they are at times painfully noticeable. First and foremost, the Tamar campaign struggles to encourage diversity in army composition, by which I mean to say that spamming Monaspas is the core of every scenario. Yes, you go about it in different ways each time, but there really isn't much incentive to really slow push with towers, halbs, and siege. Even the stable itself becomes obsolete once you get access to castles halfway through the first scenario, so both hussars and cavaliers become more or less irrelevant. This is honestly not as much of a fault of the campaign designer as it is with the Georgian civilization being rather one-dimensional, but it does feel like there are some things that could be done in the missions themselves to change this dynamic a bit. That brings us to the other issue I have with Tamar. Scenarios 2 and 4 are too easy for the complexity of their design. This is where the defending aspect of Georgians could perhaps be brought in a bit more. In the second level, the player is never really forced to rely on trash units and towers to barely hang on to the monument. No, just spam Monaspas and take out the exposed enemy castles. In the fourth level, you never really struggle for resources, and the enemy attacks are so feeble that a gigantic hit squad of Monaspas can crush everything. In all honesty, it felt like both of those missions missions were initially designed to be more challenging, but were scaled back later in development so that more casual players wouldn't struggle as much. At least that's my tinfoil hat theory. Still, with all of that said, Tamar now needs to join the rest of the campaigns on the old tier list. Now, I know I spent a decent bit of time on the faults of Tamar, but that's really just because it feels so fixable that with a couple of changes, this campaign would be one of the very best in the game. And the thing is, even so, the level design is so compelling that I still think it's one of the best campaigns in the game, and will therefore place it in the S tier. Tamar is just fun and engaging, and there is no hole I can poke in that core, most important aspect of a campaign. Every level just feels so refreshing, with either completely fresh ideas for an official campaign like in the 3rd and 4th levels, or unique takes on existing scenario concepts like the 2nd and 5th missions. Tamar herself is an interesting protagonist, and her implementation into the game as a powerful support unit feels practical and enjoyable. It's just those small but noticeable issues that, in my opinion, hold it back from the very top spot. And with that, we have completed our 2nd Mountain Royals campaign. Definitely check out the Thoris video if you haven't seen it yet, and stay tuned for the Ismail episode that will end the DLC. Of course, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Tamar campaign in the comments. I really do enjoy reading them. Before we go, I do need to thank my Patreon supporters with Anonymous in the Great Wolf tier, and Hryru, Carolyn, Dieter, Liquid Egg Product, and Tandoori in the Dire Wolf tier. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.